The approach I'm taking is that climate change changes everything. And as a lifelong environmentalist, I took my pledge as an American to save and faithfully to defend from waste the natural resources of my country. It's air, soil, and minerals, it's forests, waters, and wildlife. A little jingoistic there, and if you take out the America part and the faithfully part, I still live that way 60 years later. I went on to major in ecology at Stanford in the 1950s when nobody majored in ecology. I started the Whole Earth Catalog, as was mentioned. That was all very green. I was Mr. Natural for a while. I worked for Jerry Brown, and Jerry Brown took the energy use and greenhouse gas emissions of Californians down to the European level, basically half of what other Americans do. And then came out with this book. There's some things in it which I won't go into tonight, but that I'm pleased with. I'm basically saying that when you think about ecosystem services, it's useful to think of them as natural infrastructure. You can take infrastructure-like ideas and apply them. I think the precautionary principle is fine so long as you focus on a vigilance principle, which says the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And you focus on liberty, you focus on trying things. I want to move my fellow environmentalists in the direction of not being ideology-driven, but evidence-driven, not being enslaved by one great idea, like hedgehogs, but in love with many ideas simultaneously, like foxes. That means partly moving from science, from romance as the primary approach that environmentalists take, to keeping that, but engaging not only science, but engineering. Not only understanding fast-moving evidence, but acting on it. And I suppose English will particularly understand the approach that, you know, it's all gardening. It's all a managing of the life forms we live with in various degrees and scales. The news items in the book, the ones that are in the reviews, that are in the summaries in the newspapers, are that cities are green, nuclear power is green, genetic engineering is green, and geoengineering is probably necessary. Just to breeze by a couple of the issues with climate, I went from thinking of climate as something that was sort of remote but interesting to think about, as something that is a clear and present danger because things happen very suddenly. This unreadable slide basically is telling you some of the many gnarly aspects of climate that are not well represented in the models. There's all sorts of positive feedbacks, hidden thresholds that we discover only when we cross them, and irrevocable tipping points. And it's hard to predict when the tipping point occurs. So as dire as the IPCC scenarios are, they're actually quite conservative with these dynamics in mind. Clearly, a vast amount more science is needed. The data is getting better. The models are getting better. They have to get a whole hell of a lot better. Climate doesn't kill you. It's not rising sea levels that are going to drown you or the warmth that's going to cook you. It's other people fighting over the lower carrying capacity, killing each other over basically water and food. This is straightforward ecological stuff. Darfur may be seen in history as the first of the great climate wars, the resource wars, the chaos wars that emerge when carrying capacity goes down. Another potential warfare site is in Asia, where 40% of humanity lives downstream of the glaciers of the Himalayan plateau. In the dry season, they're getting the water from the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Mekong, the Irrawaddy, the Yangtze, and the Yellow River, all of which are fed by the glaciers of the Himalayan plateau. We've just been hearing they may not be melting quite as fast as was most worried about, but they're still melting damn fast. Because the climate science is still moving along rapidly, I have a hunch that there are some hidden negative feedbacks, balancing feedbacks in the system, which we don't understand well enough yet to know where they're working and how to help them. So the hidden sink of carbon, that part of it seems to be on the continents, which are drawing down more carbon than they're emitting these days. No one is quite sure why. The oceans may be doing that, but our ignorance about the oceans and the relationship with atmosphere is enormous. Further science there should take us toward getting a better idea of what natural systems to help out more. Another potential negative feedback is a lovely organism named Emiliana Huxley, named for Huxley, of course, known as E-Hux, his friends. This delightful organism is a coccolithophore that fixes carbon in its shell, which then sinks to the bottom and buries that carbon deep in the ocean. It makes blooms that are so reflective and raising the albedo, you can see them from space. And some research here in the UK suggests that even as oceans get more acidic, E-Hux continues to prosper. Obviously, a lot more science is needed. Those are just a few pieces of the climate argument. Moving on to the whole Earth aspects of demographics. Bear in mind, we're talking about a whole Earth problem. They're going to take whole Earth solutions. Everybody, global, nobody left out. The major demographic situation now is that 5 out of 6 people of the 6.8 billion of us live in the developing world, where a lot of change is going on. It's quite drastic, and mostly change for the better. What we're seeing in Haiti right now is terrible, but it is not the norm in the developing world. The norm in the developing world is people are moving into town, they're getting jobs, they're educating their kids, and they're having fewer kids. And they're building infrastructure. And they are starting to understand, China, I think, particularly is moving rapidly in understanding the role of natural infrastructure, the forests, aquifers, biodiversity. Predictable climate is natural infrastructure. We've had it for 10,000 years. We built our civilization in it because civilization has never experienced the rapidly jumping climate that is the norm over all of Earth's history. That's why we're still puzzled by it. We haven't experienced it before. But in the developing world, people are moving to town. They're moving to town. This has been going on for 10,000 years. But the pace has picked up and the scale has picked up. 1.3 million people a week moving to town takes us up toward, probably by mid-century, that the world as a whole will be about 80% urban, the way it is in Europe and the rest of the developed world. And 1.3 million people a week adds up to about 70 million a year. That's been going on for decades. Doesn't show any signs of slowing down until it gets to some kind of leveling off point around 80%. I see that as environmental good news because what people are, when they're moving to town, they're moving away from, to a large extent, subsistence agriculture, which is a poverty trap and an ecological disaster. As soon as they move out, especially in the tropics, the forests come back, the wild animals come back. Over time, the aquifers refill up, and the people who are left move from the marginal land to the good agricultural land and develop cash crops for sale in the growing markets in the cities. The reason people are moving to the cities is because that's where the action is. They're not necessarily moving straight to London or to Shanghai. They're moving to squatter cities like Kibera outside of Nairobi. About 1 billion people now live in squatter cities, the slums. Another 1 billion are expected. This is a huge demographic event. But it's a pretty interesting one because people are building their own houses, their own jobs. They're even in a way creating their own infrastructure, basically by stealing from whatever's passing by in the mains, electricity, water, and so on. It's pretty informal, but it works. At least it works better than nothing. I think we're still understanding how the informal economy relates to the formal economy. We have probably overabundant theory of the formal economy and damn near no theory at all of the informal economy. But you can see at edges where they press up against each other how one feeds the other. We're learning that the slums are not a way of depressing prosperity. They actually are part of building prosperity. Because you look at here on the edge in Sao Paulo, it looks like gross inequity, the poor people on the left and the extravagant rich people on the right. But on the other hand, the people that are living in the interesting part of town here over on the left get jobs, not necessarily on the record books or taxed. They walk to work as gardeners, cooks, maids, guards, and whatnot over in the boring part of town on the right. That's what cities do. It's what London does. It's what all the cities do. Economists call it the economics of agglomeration. You jam things together. Here's an example from Bangkok of jamming things together. Jamming remote train action coming in from the countryside into Bangkok, grinding right through, basically brushing up against the slum market. And then watch what happens. The ingenuity and resourcefulness and inventiveness and entrepreneurship in the slums of the world is remarkable. These are not people crushed by poverty. These are people getting out of poverty just as fast as they possibly can. And if they have to run their market right on the railway of a working railroad, they will do it and eventually find their way to a better life. They are probably the greenest people on the planet in terms of the amount of energy they use, the material they use, and all the rest of it. But they're that green because they're that poor. They do not choose to remain that poor. And we environmentalists have no business telling them they should stay poor and therefore green. So they are going to, as they get a little more money, rupee by rupee, they're building toward more protein in their food. They're building toward better energy, better electricity, and more things they can do with it. This gentleman in the Dharavi slum in Mumbai, Lakshman Kumbi, was reported in this book saying, by the way, I am occasionally accused of romanticizing slums. I once romanticized villages. That was a mistake. I do not wish to repeat that mistake, so let me get Lakshman Kumbi's life free. For toilet purposes, you have to go outside. It's a problem. We have to go in the road. The electricity is on for 2 days, then off 2 days, or not on at all. We don't have much space for the children to play in. They use the road to play, and accidents take place again and again. I am not studied and am illiterate. For work, I stitch government jeans and pants. It's fine, but the workday ends late. I want to educate my kids until the day I die, I'll educate them. As long as I'm around, that's guaranteed. There's 1 billion people in this condition, 1 billion more coming. Any environmental program has to include them and their aspirations. The education often in places like Dharavi is parents get together and pool their money, pennies, hire teachers for these private tiny schools, very unofficial off-the-record books. Some of them, an Atlantic article found, are better than the official government-run schools. In any case, that education is changing the world. And so just looking at the global north and the global south, the developed world and the developing world, you have new cities full of young people in the global south, old cities full of old people, us, and the global north. And where do you think the action's going to be? Just demographically, the next 50 years is one of the most exciting times in human history. Change of subject, but not so far. Cities run on baseload electricity that is always on. And it's mainly coal, because that's the cheapest form of electricity we have. And we will keep burning all of it that is in the ground, which is a large amount, until it is made expensive by government fiat, which wind and solar can't provide. So the green sources of baseload electricity at present are hydroelectric dams, which in most places are maxed out, and nuclear. I hope that there might be solar power from space, but I'm told by specialists in that area that even if you could get solar collectors into orbit for free, it still would be totally impractical to get usable energy down to the ground. So we are stuck at present with a choice between coal and nuclear as the source of the world's electricity. I think the main green argument for nuclear is when you compare what happens with their waste products. If all the electricity that you used in your lifetime was nuclear, the waste from that electricity would fill, I won't say a Coke can, a soda can, a heavy soda can, but it's not very much. Whereas you contrast it with what happens with coal, you're looking at 80 rail cars, each 100 tons of coal, going into a 1 gigawatt plant and turning that into 19,000 tons of carbon dioxide, plus a lot of slurry, fly ash, and atmospheric mercury. Where does the waste go? The nuclear waste at present mostly goes out back of the parking lot in these dry cask storage containers. And 20 tons of nuclear fuel turns into 20 tons of nuclear waste on the once-through approach. Whereas 2.9 million tons of coal turns into a much larger number, 19 million tons of carbon dioxide. It goes into the atmosphere, and we can't get it back, and we can't monitor it. So when you look at the lifetime use of greenhouse gases coming out of these energy forms, nuclear is down there, better than wind and solar in most respects. Now, another thing I have to look at, because I and my fellow environmentalists push wind, you're getting offshore wind and so on here in the UK, but there are footprint issues that environmentalists, I think, need to bear in mind, and we're discovering them as we build these wind farms. For 1 gigawatt, like a normal 1 gigawatt nuclear plant, which takes up a third of a square mile in terms of the actual plant itself, 250 square miles of wind farm, which also requires, usually it's a long way away from where people live, and so you have these extensive power lines. In the United States, many of the power lines that the wind farm people want to put in are being fought by environmentalists. You say, well, they sort yourselves out, people. But in fact, these things are pretty damaging to the landscape. And bear in mind, that's 1 gigawatt of capacity. That would be if wind was running all the time, that would compare to the 1 gigawatt nuclear plant, which runs at 90% capacity, wind typically 20% or less. How about solar? In California, where I live, in Southern California, we're looking at 1,000 square miles of desert being used by 80 different solar farm projects that are setting up. People don't realize that solar farms typically bulldoze the land they're on flat. Nothing lives there. Again, the amount of space for that, what did I say, 50 square miles? That's not 90% capacity. You'd have to multiply that times 5 to actually, and put it lots of different places so that the sun is always shining somewhere to have that equal a 1 gigawatt power plant. So these trade-offs start to be overwhelming. The American equivalent of David Mackay, who wrote Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air, is a fellow named Saul Griffith in the San Francisco area. And he did the math to add up what it would take to get 13 new terawatts of clean energy that would help us, that would actually permit over a long period of time to keep the parts per million of carbon dioxide down to 450, and thus get, we think, only 2 degrees Celsius rise in temperature. It adds up to thousands of square miles of different kinds of solar, thousands and thousands of wind turbines, geothermal turbines, and 1.5 million square miles of highly engineered algae for biofuel. And that still only gets you to 10 clean terawatts. And so just to round off the numbers so that it made sense, he threw in 3 terawatts of nuclear, which would add up to 3,900 1 gigawatt reactors. Oh, and we have to do it in 25 years, or it's too late. So Saul's added up the numbers and said, well, you know, this adds up to a space about the size of North America, which we might as well call Renewistan. And building Renewistan clearly will be a big event. The English version of this, beautifully done, is David Mackay's Sustainable Energy. Now, one of the issues that always comes up at a sort of a theological, mythical level is dear old Chernobyl. It haunts us. But it's worth looking at the current reality. The United Nations, a couple years ago, sent 7 different agencies up there to measure every damn thing about it. The cancer incidence, which they could not find anything that was higher cancer rates and good epidemiology. They could not find anything in terms of higher birth defect rates. So all they could do was extrapolate the maybe if you take the most conservative worrying theory, 4,000 extra people might die of cancer because of the Chernobyl accident. Well, 500,000 people had been predicted to die of cancer. So what we're finding is that radiation, bad as it was from Chernobyl, is way less horrible than we thought. Now, there's been a number of biologists on the ground in the Chernobyl, in the Red Forest, where all the pine trees died, but actually the birch trees did fine. And the wildlife has poured in. Wolves are back. Various endangered species in Europe have prospered in this area. It is now a major the biggest and richest wildlife refuge in all of Europe. And that happened because basically people were moved out. The United Nations thinks that was a mistake, that their lives were disrupted so badly. That is what made life very hard for the Ukrainians there, but it was great for the wildlife who don't give a rat's ass about the radiation. It has done them no harm. Robert Baker measured mice and found these radioactive mothers full of radioactive embryonic mice who then were born perfectly normally. And so there's a lot more science to be done, but what we've got already says that radiation is not the horror that we imagined. And as Robert Baker, the zoologist who was there for 10 years, points out, it's interesting that the world's worst nuclear accident was less harmful to wildlife than what humans normally do in terms of logging, agriculture, and city areas. So Pripyat is forested, the wild animals are back. I figure within a decade we'll have Chernobyl National Park. This is something the United Nations has actually encouraged because the major problems in the Chernobyl area now are economic. They need ecotourists, and we can go and be horrified by what happened at the site. The radiation, of course, has gone back down to what it is outside this building. There's a few hot spots, and they're fading fast. And so we can enjoy this newly forested town and also the rich wildlife. An area I won't do more than touch on is the question of weapons proliferation from nuclear power. But in the United States, 10% of our electricity comes from decommissioned Russian warheads. Basically, this is one of the best swords in the plowshares programs in the world. Unlike lots of other weapon systems where all you get is a scrap metal, with these damned warheads, they're really, really good sources of fuel when you blend them down into the very mild form of nuclear fuel. And so a lot of warheads have already been, from Russia, have already been turned into fuel. A lot more will be. And then the US is starting on its stockpile. And it would be nice if everybody worked on their stockpile and turned it into nuclear power. A number of environmentalists have come around to nuclear in one form or another. One who's been there all his life is James Lovelock, who you know, the Gaia hypothesis guy. John Holdren, an energy expert who is science advisor to President Obama, is pro-nuclear. Jared Diamond, Collapse, is pro-nuclear. Tim Flannery, biologist from Australia, is. Jesse Ausable. Patrick Moore, my friend Paul Hawkins, says he was somewhat converted by my book in this direction. You're Stephen Tyndale, who's head of Greenpeace UK, went from strongly and actively anti-nuclear to actively pro-nuclear. And then we have James Hansen, who's the fellow who said we have to take the parts per million from 450 carbon dioxide now to 350, and thereby instigated a huge movement in the environmental movement. But he also advised President Obama, please do not listen to anti-nuclear environmentalists, because they will prevent the next generation of nuclear power being developed, and we will keep on burning coal to keep the lights on, and that will cook us all. The Whole Earth Catalog was basically a libertarian Bible, and at the time of John F. Kennedy, who was my commander-in-chief when I was in the Army, he said, ask not what your country can do for you. Well, the Whole Earth Catalog said, ask not what your country can do for you, do yourself. And we basically, in a lot of the environmental movement, turned away from government as the place to go for answers. But when it comes to climate change, we are going to require action from governments. And specifically the major emitting governments, which at least did start talking to each other in Copenhagen. Basically, if the European governments, the North American governments, China, and India all find one way or another to make coal so expensive it stays in the ground, or is somehow burned in a clean enough way that the carbon dioxide doesn't get in the atmosphere, then we have a shot. In the absence of that, we probably don't. Also, in terms of geoengineering, which I'll get to in a minute, governments have an enormous role. Now, there's a lot of activity in new reactors. Some of my fellow environmentalists are saying, well, it's a dead technology, a dead end. It's not going anywhere. Actually, it's moving very rapidly now. It's not only moving very rapidly with lots of new customers in the world, it's moving very rapidly with new generations of reactors being built. I won't get into the fourth generation reactors that can treat the used fuel, so-called spent fuel, as new fuel by turning it straight into fuel for integral fast reactors. But we are seeing something that environmentalists, I think, are increasingly enthused by, which is small modular reactors. Small meaning down around 25 megawatts. So the Russians are already building some. The reason they're building them is because the ice is melting north of Russia. That will be a new major route for shipping. They're pouring concrete for ports all along the Northern Sea route. Canada is getting ready to do the same along the Northwest Passage. That ice is going to keep on melting because of one of these positive feedback effects. And to provide the electricity for those ports, the Russians are building these 35 megawatt reactors floating on barges. Instantly, some coastal developing countries are saying, build a couple extra ones, we could use that as well. The scale difference is enormous, basically 1/64th of a Class A Deriva 1.6 gigawatt reactor. And smallness means that financially they're much cheaper to build. They are much safer in many respects. Small scale means that it can be manufactured not on site, but in a factory, shipped to the place, stuck in the ground, and treated as the terminology you're starting to hear is a nuclear battery. Again, because they're small, you have a very fast design cycle. Lots of new forms of small reactors are coming along. Here's one that comes from the Lawrence Livermore lab. For some reason, they love describing these things with their acronyms: small, sealed, transportable, autonomous. All of these are serious advantages. One that is already commercial from a Los Alamos design is Hyperion, based in New Mexico. These things are completely changed the thought from that that governments have to make these huge decisions, communities have to make these huge decisions about financing and building nuclear reactors. These things can be done locally. Another company called NuScale in Oregon is building a small one. They're modular, which means you can buy one, install it, start to electrify part of your town, goes well, get some more money, build in another one, connect it to the first. You've already got the site for it. It grows incrementally, like squatter cities. Even one of the oldest players in the States, Babcock Wilcox, who's been making the naval reactors for 50 years, is getting into the game with what they're calling mPower. Also in this area, there's ingenuity. India, there's 3 times as much thorium in the world as uranium. and it has many potential advantages over uranium as a fuel source. One design that's coming out of Seattle is basically to make a thorium reactor that is good for 60 years, and the waste situation is so convenient, you just leave it right where it is. It becomes its own little sarcophagus. That's that, like a disposable battery. Lots more to be said on this subject. That's just breezing by it. In this part of the world, GMOs, genetically modified organisms, what I prefer to call, and scientists in the business call, genetically engineered crops mostly. It's become a harmful realm of activity by my fellow environmentalists. I say in the book that we've starved people, we've hindered science, and we've deprived our practitioners of a very crucial tool. Basically, we've turned off everybody who we think should be thinking green to the most powerful technology of this century, which is biotechnology. It is already swamping information technology in terms of its capability and its importance. And to just say, we're going to pay no attention to that, I think is just stupid. In any case, who uses genetically engineered food crops? Well, in the United States, the Amish do. The Amish are the most suspicious people of new technology of anybody. But they are also arguably our very best farmers. And they just, this is better seed as far as they're concerned. So they use it readily. Likewise, in South Africa, the white maize that everybody loves has been genetically engineered for years and is all the better for it. This is an area I'd recommend a couple books. One of the best is Sir Gordon Conway's The Doubly Green Revolution. He was in the thick of the first green revolution, saw its environmental shortcomings, sees genetic engineering as a major part of making the next green revolution that we need to feed 8 or 9 billion people, be ecologically profound as well as good food. A couple of Californians, an organic farmer, one of the leaders of organic farming in California, is married to a genetic engineer, Pamela Ronald, who's won prizes for her developments in rice. They did a book together saying basically the combination of organic farming and gardening plus genetically engineered seed can be a brilliant combination. And just a good overview is Gina Fedorov's Mendel in the Kitchen. She is a leading advisor to Hillary Clinton. She was also the advisor to Condoleezza Rice. She's so good that the Obama administration kept her. These crops, the transgenic crops, are the most successful agricultural innovation in history. Many environmentalists say farmers, it's bad for the farmers. Well, the farmers are customers who are buying this stuff, and they're buying it because it works better. 40% of world crops are lost to weeds and to pests. And just the two kinds of herbicide-resistant and pest problematic, like BT corn, those two kinds of crops are so advantageous that people are getting them everywhere. I circled the weird blank of Africa here. That blank was caused by European green organizations convincing African governments for 10 years that this stuff is poison. As a result, people starved. The tropical farming especially needs these kind of crops. It's a way different form of agriculture than we have in the temperate zones. The area which is just now starting to develop is biofortified food. 10 years ago, we had golden rice developed by a Swiss scientist. My fellow environmentalists fought that and have delayed the process of that, getting it through the field trials and into release for 10 years. Well, half of the world subsists on rice, but it doesn't have enough vitamin A to keep the kids from going blind, unless they have a whole lot of other things in their diet, which many don't. So with these vitamin A precursors in the rice, it changes all that. It is finally now getting through the field trials and into release in Asia, and that's a fantastic improvement. A good book on this whole subject is Robert Paulberg's Starved for Science, How Biotechnology is Being Kept Out of Africa. It's a scandalous story. It's a very well-told story in the book. Environmentalists say there's a moral, ethical issue with genetically modified organisms in transgenic crops. And your Newfield Council on Bioethics looked at this whole field in great subject in great depth twice and came up with the conclusion that there's a moral imperative for making GM crops readily and economically available to people in developing countries who want them. And I'm persuaded by that. But it's not just the developing world that's getting the benefits of especially the GE biofortified foods. Yeah, the Biocassava Plus is going to be great. It's coming on fast now in field trials in Africa. Yeah, better sorghum, better bananas. But also, there's a engineered carrot that people who can't get their calcium from dairy products can get it from these carrots. If you like resveratrol, so you can live as long as a Frenchman but don't like red wine, there's a form of wine coming from China that has 6 times resveratrol. If you're allergic to peanuts, don't worry. The University of Georgia is developing an allergy-free peanut. The idea of pigs with omega-3 fatty acids as good as fish, so that the bacon I had this morning, I would like an extra helping because it's extra good for me. That's such a prospect. But frankly, as an environmentalist, just to take some of the pressure off the wild fishing, the fishing of wild fish that goes on in the oceans, that would be tremendous in its own right. So Monsanto is coming out for the first time with a biofortified food, a soybean that has omega-3 fatty acids. And in Japan, they're developing several forms of rice that basically have medicine in them. And there will be more and more of that coming. Geoengineering, what I think will be seen by many as the biggest taboo of all. Climatologists were very averse to the subject. Governments so far are pretty much averse to the subject, though your Royal Society now has taken it on. The reason that it is being taken more and more seriously is because of the realizations I mentioned here, that building and renew a stand may be approximately impossible or slower than we can do it in time. That we're not going to be able to hold down parts per million to 450 of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That we're going to keep finding climate emergencies. We had a major typhoon in the Bay of Bengal that turned a little bit east of Bangladesh last time. It hit Burma, caused enormous damage there. We are getting stronger and stronger storms. James Hansen is pointing out why, that as the ice melts in the polar regions, it keeps the ocean cold even though they're melting. But meanwhile, the overall global heating is heating up the tropics. So with hotter tropics and still cold Arctic regions, you get much stronger storms. That may even be, who knows, somewhat related to the snow you guys are getting. Because we don't know all of the weirdness that's going on with climate, so far most of the discoveries we're finding tend to be more bad news than good news. I dearly hope we can find some more good news, negative feedbacks, but I wouldn't count on it. And then the to some people, a horrifying aspect is that geoengineering can be pretty cheap. Well, here's one that was free. One of the reasons that climatologists are persuaded by the idea of sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere is we have an existence proof. In 1991, Mount Pinatubo sent 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, which spread out and cooled down the entire planet by 0.5 degrees Celsius. The next year, 1992, there was so much more ice in the Arctic region that the polar bears had an extra large crop of cubs that were known as the Pinatubo cubs. And when you have an existence proof like this, climatologists have to say, and by the way, Hansen was one of the guys who predicted how it would play out. Okay, well, that one works. And then they ran the models and discovered that if you had 1 Pinatubo a year, basically that would cool the planet by 3 degrees Celsius. In other words, it would be about, it could handle the equivalent of, if we went from, say, 400 parts per million carbon dioxide and doubled it to 800 parts per million carbon dioxide, you would have problems. You would have acidified oceans and so on. But the overall temperature of the Earth would stay what it is now. What is the cost of this kind of project? Nathan Myhrvold and his crew at Intellectual Ventures in Seattle ran some of the numbers on this, came up with a pretty cute idea to put just 3 million tons a year in the lower stratosphere, Obviously, you would start doing this incrementally to see if it actually works. But with just 30 blimp-supported 10-mile-high fire hoses, and they worked out the engineering of it. It looks like it could work. The cost of $300 million a year, you could keep the whole damned Earth cool enough while you make all the mitigation efforts that you need to have the long-term balanced Earth. My expectation is that we will go this route. But how the hell are governments going to agree about it? Another one coming, of course, a lot more science needed on that one. Another one coming straight out of Britain is your atmospheric scientist, George Latham, working with your stunning engineer, Stephen Salter, came up with the world's coolest sailing ship, the catamaran, robot-controlled, navigated from satellites, that would wander around atomizing seawater, making enough nuclei out of the then immediately evaporated seawater to make water droplets that would brighten the clouds. I've been part of some of the meetings on this, and the engineers are trying to figure out how to atomize seawater. They've employed some of the retired engineers who did inkjet printers, this is a very big inkjet printer from their standpoint. And simultaneously, on the engineering track, the science track, there's an atmospheric chemist or a physicist at one of the meetings I was at. He says, well, okay, and John Latham was at the table. He says, let me see if I've got this right. We don't understand how clouds actually work in terms of climate. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. We don't understand all that we should about how clouds actually form. I mean, there's dew point, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff we don't know, right? Right. So we know that there's nuclei that make the droplets, make the clouds, but we don't know how many nuclei are involved in that or what size. Is that correct? Yeah, that's correct. So there's so much science to move ahead with on this. But it is moving ahead. It's all moving ahead privately. These are basically hobbies. There's no government funding that I know of to pursue this kind of science, and there needs to be. So that's a pretty green-looking one because, you know, no fossil fuel died except in the making of the catamarans. A totally green one that even Al Gore likes. Al Gore is not in favor of geoengineering in any form. I've argued with him about it. But he loves biochar, and he does that by not calling it geoengineering. Biochar is where you pyrolyze agricultural waste and logging waste, basically turn it into charcoal, and just the way the Amazon Indians did, turning 20% of the Amazon from sterile rainforest soil into rich agricultural soil millennia ago. We can do that now, and potentially with you can take, it doesn't make good soil better, but it makes bad soil good soil. So you can take degraded land, put biochar in it. The charcoal molecule is really, really stable. There's places in the Amazon that are 4,000 years old. It looks like there's been no loss. So this is a way to really fix carbon and keep it there. It can be a great grassrootsy kind of thing to do. Whether it will scale up to the level that we need to actually bring down, suck this carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and keep it out of the atmosphere remains to be seen. So a lot more science to be done. Summing up, I have to agree with Nobel Prize-winning climatologist Paul Crutzen, who refers to our era geologically as the Anthropocene. That is the human impacted and I suppose eventually human controlled geological era. Things we're doing in the atmosphere will stay there for tens of thousands of years. Our activities are highly visible in the geological record already. So the fact is we are terraforming Earth already. We don't have a choice of stopping. We only have a choice of doing it well, and hence the line, we are as gods and have to get good at it. Now I would add one further point. I think summing up the whole book, I would say that ecological balance is too important for sentiment. It requires science. The health of natural infrastructure is too compromised for passivity. It requires engineering. What we call natural and what we call human are inseparable. We live one life. Thank you.